Okay. At any given time in the US, there are thousands of couples waiting to hear back about their adoption applications. For every child waiting to be adopted, there are dozens of families trying to adopt. In addition, roughly 428,000 children are in foster care in the United States. Luckily, around 135,000 children are adopted in the US every year. With hundreds of thousands of children being housed as orphans, it may be time for us to rethink the way that we select parents as they select the parents that are allowed to be adopted or allowed to adopt. Okay. Growing up, I was raised in a daycare, like foster care center, and I was treated by my grandmother. I saw groups of children grow up without parents and be raised temporarily by my grandmother with me helping. Since then, I've been curious as to why couples don't have a greater chance to adopt a child into their family. There are hundreds of thousands of children in foster care in the US right now, and they're waiting to have families to adopt them. Today, we will discuss the positive and negative effects of making the adoption processes in the US easier and how they might affect our society. My goal by the end of this discussion is not to decide the best route for our adoption programs, but to open your eyes to the issues of our adoption processes and how these changes could affect families. Okay, first we will discuss the advantages to making screening processes for adoption easier for parents. Based on a study done in 2013, nearly 100 million people have adopted relatives in their immediate families. The official process of adopting another couple's child into your family began in the early 1850s when the Massachusetts Adoption of Children Act was passed, and the first specialized adoption agencies then didn't begin until around the 1920s. Now, adoption is a helpful and popular alternative to pregnancy and is very common in our topics. According to the Adoption Network website, the average child placed in adoption agencies will wait there for 3 years before being adopted. And with every year, the likeliness of a child being adopted from those agencies becomes far less. In addition, the average wait time for a couple is between 2 and 7 years when adopting a healthy infant. Based on the studies done by Adoption and Beyond, this time frame primarily applies to traditional nuclear families that involve just a mom and a dad who often already have biological children of their own. This is not including non-traditional families or parents that are a part of the LGBT community, so those usually have to wait longer than 7 years. Based on the information from American Adoptions, parents who wish to adopt must first go through what is called a home study. This involves rounds of interviews and often multiple visits to the prospective parent's home by a hired social worker, and they could do that at a random time usually. This is used for the court to decide if the environment would be optimal for a child to be adopted into. Collection of all birth certificates and marriage licenses are required to be requested by each parent and given to their social worker before continuing the adoption process, and they usually don't get their birth certificate back ever. Based on multiple records and recounts by parents and social workers from the American Adoptions, this is the lengthiest part of the adoption process, is just collecting those documents and sending them in correctly. In my opinion, if these documents were more accessible or if the home study process was more efficient and handled faster, we may see more adoptions each year. Now, I'd like to talk about why modifying this process may be less beneficial in the long run for parents and children in these adoption centers. According to a study done by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, the process of home study may also be taking a long time due to the constant communication that is done between the birth and prospective parents, and that's mediated by the adoption agencies. So usually it's not done where they just talk to each other. It usually has to have a mediator and usually has to be set up. This is due to the detailed work social workers do for the adoption agencies to make sure the background for the parents is clean and the home of the child will be safe when they get adopted and put into their family. Information from the Adoption Network states that over 100,000 children in foster care are waiting to be adopted. And based on this study by Fisher and his colleagues, children that spend a significant amount of time in foster care are likely to experience behavioral and mood issues through their development. As this stress increases during their development, these children are more susceptible to developing depression or anxiety disorder. Because of this, The detailed process we have implemented in the United States may be necessary to ensure that these children have a better environment going forward in their lives. Okay. Now that we've discussed the advantages and disadvantages of modifying our current adoption process, I would like to take questions that you have. Adam?
I have a question. Oh my god. So, how does adopting in the United States compare as far as like difficulty and like time spent compared to the other countries?
Usually it'll take longer to adopt in the U.S. That's why usually people adopt from out of countries, including like China, is just because it usually will cost the same amount, but there's a lot less paperwork and there's a lot less like fighting with social workers, so it might take the same amount of time, but it's usually a little bit of a less hassle. Okay, any other questions?
I've got a question. So what kind of modifications would you make to the house studies? Would you make less visits, or could that be dangerous?
I'm not really sure. They're very subjective, so I feel like maybe they should be a little bit more standardized. It's more like if they don't like your house or if they don't like your family, they can choose to not let you adopt or not let you work through their agency. So if that was a little bit more standardized, that might work better. And I don't know why they keep their birth certificates or why it's so hard to get them, but if we can make that more accessible, social workers should be able to get them pretty easily, so I don't really know why. Yeah. Any more questions? All
I have
right.
a question. Would you say it's easier to adopt an infant or a young child?
An infant, always. The older they get, the more likely they're not to adopt. But usually they're only there for 3 years. So by then they'll usually get adopted. Okay, thank you.